Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you...
Hello and welcome back to Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia, a Fans Guided by Voices podcast. My name is Jeff Gomez, and I'm the author of Zeppelin over Dayton, Guided by Voices, album by album. Zeppelin over Dayton is available wherever books are sold. Today we'll be looking at the band's second LP of 2020 and 30th overall, Mirrored Aztec. You can also visit everygbvlp.com to listen to episodes covering every GBV studio album, special bonus episodes, and the 27-track Guided by Voices tribute record called How Do You Spell GBV? Now let's get to the show. Okay, we are back. It's August 2020, and today we're going to look at the second of three GBV LPs that are going to come out this year, Mirrored Aztec. The album caps an extremely productive time for the band, not to mention it lands during what's arguably the most bizarre situation in recent memory, and that's of course the worldwide coronavirus pandemic. The year started off innocently enough with the group's already legendary 100-song show in Los Angeles. In February, they released their 29th album, the very fine Surrender Your Poppy Field, and they had a bunch of shows, including some festivals, scheduled throughout the rest of the year. However, as Sparks says, never turn your back on Mother Nature. Just as spring was gearing up, the coronavirus descended upon pretty much every corner of the world, locking down nearly all aspects of life. Travel was canceled, schools were closed, and just about anyone who could work from home had to do so. I myself have been stuck in my house with my wife and son for going on 6 months now. In terms of how it's going, let's just say I have a new appreciation for the film The Shining. It's a pretty scary time, made all the more frightening because there's no real end in sight. For Bob and the band, this meant the cancellation or rescheduling of their planned 2020 tour. As of right now, in mid-August, they still have 4 East Coast shows in the calendar, one in October, 2 in November, and 1 in December, dates which are already rescheduled from this past May and April. Whether or not these concerts will actually happen is anyone's guess, but since social distancing at a Guided by Voices show is about as easy as staying dry when you jump into a pool, I wouldn't count on it. Of course, one of the ways bands and performers are staying busy during lockdown, not to mention earning some extra cash, is by performing quiet, intimate shows from their living rooms or basements. That's not quite GBV's style, so instead of going unplugged, in July, all 4 members drove to Ohio. They spent a day practicing and then took the stage at Dayton venue The Bright Side for a blistering 52-song concert that was streamed by the website Noon Chorus. Advance tickets were only $20, and 20% of the ticket sales went to venues the bands played over the years. GBV put on a great show, even though it was indeed a bit strange to see them without the sweaty, beer-soaked human element. Pollard himself called it a sporting event without the crowd. Ironically, this may have been actually a good thing for anyone on the fence about seeing GBV in the flesh. As former drummer Don Thrasher wrote in the Dayton Daily News for an article leading up to the show, if you're curious but still unfamiliar with the indie rock stalwarts known for a dizzying number of releases and 3 decades of frenzied, boozed-filled performances, an at-home concert experience could be the best and safest entry point. As a 50-year-old man who has experienced serious chest pains in the mosh pit after screaming out one too many GBV lyrics, I think Thrasher's onto something. Other than the streamed concert, Pollard's spending his coronavirus downtime the same as everyone else, being bored and sleeping more. However, he also told Rolling Stone that he's been organizing notebooks, tapes, and other items in my personal archives, writing songs and making collages. Whether this leads to another volume of the Suitcase series or a clutch of double or even triple records, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But really, other than the canceled tour dates, the pandemic hasn't stopped Bob or GBV. That's actually the opposite. We're seeing a veritable flurry of activity from the band. In fact, I will go out on a limb and state that right here, right now, is perhaps the best time in history, outside of maybe the year 1994, to be a GBV fan. Don't believe me? Let's look at the facts. Mirrored Aztec is the second of 3, count them 3, GBV LPs that will be released this year. Their next record, entitled Styles We Paid For, is slated to be out in November. 2020 is also the 25th anniversary of Alien Lanes. To celebrate, Matador is reissuing the record on colored vinyl. Pre-orders have been up for a while, and the LP comes out on the same day as Mirrored Aztec. Earlier in the year, to help celebrate the anniversary, longtime collaborator and friend of the band Mike Postolakis directed another star-studded video, this time for the Alien Lanes track My Valuable Hunting Knife. It's a lot of fun, so check it out. Not to be outdone by Matador, Scat Records is back after a hiatus. The label's website has been relaunched at realscatrecords.com, and Robert Griffin has already released some fun and gorgeous reissues with more on the way. Most recently, he's reissued Vampire and Titus on 2 different variations of colored vinyl. Both sold out pretty much immediately, but Griffin has promised to keep the regular version in print indefinitely. He's also released both B1000 and Vampire and Titus on cassette, and both are really fun packages. I think it's especially fitting for Titus, since that's how Griffin originally heard it. Coming later this year is a colored vinyl reissue of Propeller, with a different cover than has been originally appeared, so keep an eye out for that, too. I should also mention that Griffin's been digitizing and distributing a variety of different scat artists, including releases from his own very fine band Prison Shake, so check out the new Scat Records website at realscatrecords.com for some great stuff. I have to say, I think my own personal favorite non-GBV item from Scat is the LP by folk artist Bullet for Fidel, so check that out. Bob also recently put out a new edition of his magazine, Eat, entitled Planet Cake. It's the 16th edition, and like the previous edition, it's in the new, larger format that's just gorgeous. It's 238 pages and comes with a 7-song 7-inch. Bob also recently graced the cover of magazine The Big Takeover for their 40th anniversary issue. But wait, there's more. Former GBV member Tobin Sprout will be releasing his latest LP next month. Entitled Empty Horses, it comes out on September 18th from Fire Records. It's being issued on vinyl as well as in a special book-back CD, which contains 24 pages of Toby's paintings and lyrics. Prints are also available of the record's cover, which is a striking painting by Sprout. An advance single for the record came out earlier in the year for a song called Broken Ground. The track is a gorgeous country-tinged tune, complete with steel guitar. This is Toby's follow-up to 2017's very fine album, The Universe and Me. Sprout's also touring next year. Speaking of country music, Pollard side project Cash Rivers is also making a comeback. The band's 4th LP, Bad Side of the Coin, comes out in late October and will be available for pre-orders next month. And if all of that isn't enough, the band recently launched a digital subscription program called Hot Freaks. For $100 a year, you'll get, as it says in the GBV website, sneak previews of brand new songs, plus rarities, never heard before tracks, demos, live concert recordings, rare photos and videos, recording secrets, exclusive swag offers, and many more surprises from deep within the Guided by Voices vaults. The material is delivered every Tuesday via email. Now, since I indeed subscribe to the Bob's Too Prolific argument, I have to admit I was skeptical when I first heard about this. I figured the last thing I needed from GBV was yet more stuff to listen to. Also, $100 is $100. However, I pretty quickly caved to peer pressure and subscribed, and I have to say it's totally worth it. In fact, it's actually worth much more than $100. The stuff you get access to is a lot of fun, like when Bob walks you through his record collection in his pajamas. As someone who's never actually met Uncle Bob, getting these little glimpses into Pollard as a person are, frankly, priceless. So it's totally worth it, and is pretty much the icing on the cake of what was already shaping up to be a pretty momentous year. One more thing to mention before we dive into the new LP is the website radiogbv.com. This is a site which is streaming Pollard's music 24 hours a day. It also offers a chat room for people to talk about Bob and his work, and you can request tunes. It's a super cool thing, so be sure to check that out at radiogbv.com. All right, now let's start to talk about Mirrored Aztec. This is a remarkably good album which continues even further the winning streak for this new classic lineup. It has some great songs, interesting production touches, and is pretty much a fantastic listen all the way through. It offers 18 songs in 41 minutes. Now, to my ears, despite it being a fine album, I think it is a few songs too many. In fact, with 18 tracks, it follows the template Bob followed during the reunion years, which spanned from 2012 to 2014, where each of those 5 albums had 17 songs or more. With the exception of double LPs August by Cake and Zeppelin over China, and the EP collection/LP Warp and Woof, 5 of the recent GBV LPs have had 15 tracks or fewer. So if I had to fault Aztec at all, it would be that 1 or 2 of the 18 tracks kind of drag and don't add much to the overall album. Another thing that makes me love this LP is the cover. The sleeve features a painting by Dayton artist Courtney Latta. It's the first time that artwork by anyone other than Bob has graced a GBV sleeve since 2001's Isolation Drills, and that was done only because TVT wouldn't let Pollard design his own record covers. 1999's Do the Collapse also featured non-Bob artwork. And not that me or anyone else was getting particularly tired of seeing Pollard's artwork on the albums, but it's a refreshing change to see a different kind of sleeve design for the band. And for the first time in the band's existence, what's used is a super cool neo-psychedelic painting, which is a pretty perfect representation of what's found on the record. In fact, it's in the top 5 of my all-time favorite GBV sleeves, which is saying something since I really do like Bob's collages. I reached out to Courtney to see how it came to be that her artwork was featured on the record, and she was kind enough to answer my questions. Lotta, who works primarily in ink pen, watercolor, and Sharpie markers, says her influences vary, with formative ones being cartoons like Rugrats and The Simpsons. When she started drawing years ago, she basically tried to draw what she used to watch on TV. This was later transformed into her current style, which she describes as a trippy flow of old vintage patterns and cool color combinations. In terms of the artwork that's on the sleeve, which is called Flower Crown, she said, with this piece I really wanted to do something simple and fun, and so I drew what comes easiest, which is flowers and women. Bob first heard of Courtney when her partner, Evan, a hardcore GBV fan, met up with Bob to buy a collage and have a few drinks. Their conversation eventually turned to Courtney's artwork, and when Pollard saw Flower Crown, he decided to use it for the sleeve. And even though Courtney's only known of the band for about 4 years, she's a fan. Prints of the piece can be ordered on Etsy. You can find her by looking for the vendor Tin Can Fran. I'll also post a direct link to the piece on the podcast Facebook page. I ordered one of the prints and it looks great. GBV's new merch store is also selling t-shirts of the design, with the color of the shirt matching the artwork's purple background. It's a great cover and I'm glad Bob did something different. Slightly less interesting is the back of the album. It features the LP's song titles next to a patio photo from a Dayton watering hole called Bar Granada. The picture was taken by bar manager and event coordinator Amy Lane. The photo is nearly identical to one that appeared on the bar's Facebook page last June prior to its grand opening. Bar Granada bills itself as a local hotspot for live music and craft tequila located in downtown Dayton. Since Bob, in concert anyway, likes to augment his regimen of Miller Lite with a few swigs of tequila, I can see why he would be a fan of a place that offers gourmet varieties of the liquor. However, how or why that translates into putting a photo of the place's patio on the back of his latest record, I don't know. But I'm betting a shot of wings will be on the back of the next LP. A bit more customary is the inside sleeve of the gatefold cover, which features a cool Pollard collage along with the album's lyrics. The main feature of the interior collage is a photo of a young girl, seen in profile, wearing a crocheted hat. It's awfully reminiscent of the woman on the front, who we also only see in profile, facing the same direction, and whose head is similarly adorned. It's almost as if the girl on the inside is grown up to be the woman we see on the cover. As a title, Mirrored Aztec has been around for years. In a 2013 article in Rolling Stone, Pollard's asked what he has planned for the following year. As part of his answer, he replies, "I'm thinking of doing another teenage guitar album and calling it Mirrored Aztec." He followed through on that threat, except the eventual LP was called More Lies from the Gooseberry Bush. Something to note about the LP is that this is record number 30 from the band. That's a pretty amazing number, made all the more amazing when you figure that in just a few months, that number is going to go up to 31. There was no advanced single for the album. Surrender Your Poppy Field saw 2 singles issued, and Zeppelin Over China had 1. There also hasn't been an official video from the band in terms of new material since Space Gun's That's Good back in 2018. Early reviews of the album have been uniformly positive. Slant magazine gave it 3.5 stars, writer Michael Joshua Rowan calling it bright, rousing, old-school power pop. He also declared that the band has gone back to basics after 2 consecutive outings heavy on prog rock structures and odd time signatures. Kaylin Bell, writing for the website Exclaim, likes the LP even more. Giving the album an 8 out of 10, he calls the record a non-stop ride of Pollard's classic pop melodies and simply innovative compositions. And Fred Thomas, giving the LP 4 stars, writes at allmusic.com, high energy and high strung, Mirrored Aztec is a cut above the usual set of fresh Pollard tunes. Let's now look at Mirrored Aztec for ourselves, going through the LP track by track. The album opens with what could be the coronavirus national anthem. I think I had it, I think I have it again.
I'm keeping it low now. Yeah, I promised my father, but I crave it
This fun tune is the perfect opener for the album. I especially love where, in the second line, Bob writes, "I promised my father." For a guy who was so at odds with his parents for such a long time, they never believed in his music, and his dad had wanted his namesake to go into sports and not rock and roll, let alone teaching. It's just touching that, now that his parents are gone, he's still keeping his promises. Some production flourishes late in the song, including call and response vocals and a chorused electric guitar, add a lot. It's a great way to start the album. Second song on side one is Bunko Men.
When the next wave begins, the old will recede, and your bride will tell.
This is a reworking of an earlier track which has appeared in a few places. It was first included on the initial Suitcase compilation, which came out in 2000. The track was credited to the band Elf God. It was included again on the 2007 Fading Captain Series Best of Crickets. Here's what that sounds like.
I've got a thing or two I wanna give to you again. I see a real breakthrough.
As you can tell, the two versions are pretty similar. The lyrics and the verses are different, but the choruses are the same. Musically, they're also pretty similar, except this new version is much more crisp. In fact, the production here sounds great, and the choruses, with Bob providing some gorgeous harmonies, become the most anthemic moment on a GBV album since the track Space Gun. It's absolutely stellar, and when the next GBV Best of is compiled, I would hope that this would be on it. It's definitely one of my favorite songs on the record. The term Bunko Men has been around for a while. In fact, more than 100 years ago, magician Harry Houdini, in his 1906 book, The Right Way to Do Wrong, which, by the way, sounds like it could be a Pollard song title, defined the term bunco like this. The origin of the term bunco comes from an old English game of chance in which a checkered cloth covered with numbers and stars is covered with a hood called a bunco. The game was to throw dice, which counted up to a certain concealed number. The man who knew the game was called the bunco man or the banker, and later when this form of swindle became notorious, the term was corrupted into bunco. Today the word is used to denote almost any swindle where the victim is made to believe he is to receive a large sum of money or valuables and then gets nothing at all. The lyrics only obliquely reference this, talking of an innocence of games. Despite the unsavory beginnings of bunco, it's still played today as a game of pure luck. There are global bunco tournaments. There's even a worldwide bunco association whose website you can visit at worldbunco.com. And finally, the lyrics also name-check the band's 1996 album, at one point Bob writing Under the Bushes, and then following that later with Under the Stars. Now let's move on to Citizens Blitz.
Everyone's up to somewhere, but you should know you must run. You can't walk.
This is an okay song. Not horrible, but it's not my favorite. And seeing as how the first side is otherwise so strong, and the album has 18 tracks, if I had to choose a song or two to purge from the record, this would be one of them. There's just not much to latch onto. There's no real chorus or even a melody. It just kind of starts and then relentlessly drives forward for 2 minutes. Moving on, fourth song on the first side is To Keep an Area.
Child, you know, in time to go.
I absolutely love this track. It's got a gorgeous tune, the band sounds great, and the lyrics are quite touching. It also has a lightness that makes me think of the band's second period on Matador. This could easily be on Earthquake Glue. I also love that there's a super tasteful solo by Gillard. One of the drawbacks of having songs which are under 2 minutes means that there's no extra space for instrumental passages or flourishes, which is a shame since this is a tremendously capable blend of players and it's a pleasure to hear them stretch out. It's also an interesting song lyrically. Since Bob's 2 kids are now fully grown, I doubt the child he's addressing in the track is either of them, but the point of the words is protection. He's telling someone that he doesn't want to see them go, that he wants to shield and defend them from the world. Indeed, the area of the track's title is, as Pollard writes, a safe haven, the person's own zone, a place where nothing bad can happen to them. As a parent, this really resonates with me. If I had my way, my son would never leave the house and I'd be able to protect him forever. Yes, we want our loved ones to have experiences, but we also don't want them to get hurt. We wish we could protect them like what Pollard talks about in the song, but in the end, we know we need to let them be free. Getting hurt is a part of life. It just comes with the territory, or rather, the area. Anyway, this is a very strong track and one of my favorites on the album. Next up is Easier Not Charming.
Easier, not charming. Studied quotes and slit throats for words to come out.
This is the second shortest song on the album at just shy of a minute and a half. But it's one of those short GBV tracks that really works. It's got some meaty hooks, it sounds great, and it goes back and forth between two distinct musical styles. 1 second it's jangly, and the next thing you know, it's chugging forward like a blues rocker. It's a lot of fun. Moving on, can I just say, please don't be honest.
Skeleton. Stick figure of myself.
The title here is an obvious nod to the band's 2016 album, Please Be Honest. That LP was momentous for two things. Bob played every single instrument, a first for a GBV album, and it's the LP which resurrected the name Guided by Voices after Bob shit-canned the band partly through the tour for Cool Planet. On the album, Please Be Honest, there was a track with the same name. Pitchfork wrote that the song touches on a real-world subject, Pollard's attempts to get someone to level with him. This time, as the title indicates, Bob wants the exact opposite. He writes, "Please don't be honest and tell me I'm wrong again. Please don't be forthright and say I should know." And even though the previous track hinted at the kind of prog changes that have appeared on the last couple of records, think of Cul-de-sac Kids or Year of the Hard Hitter, this is the first one that embodies that modular songwriting approach I talked about in the Surrender Your Poppy Field episode. Because even though the verses of Please Don't Be Honest are done in the band's usual hard-charging rock sound, the choruses instantly shift to a gorgeous 12-string guitar interlude which, I dare say, sounds a tad like the opening to Hotel California. This lasts for about a minute before the song shifts back to the rock format for the song's last 45 seconds. In fact, the very last verse is sung over a power pop groove that makes me think of Tommy Two-Tone's 8-6-7-5-3-0-9. Needless to say, it's a lot to be worked into a 2.5-minute song, but it's also a lot of fun. Side 1 starts to wind down with Show of Hands.
This concoction is strained, very smooth and contained, but walls
Similar to the first two songs on the LP, this starts with Bob singing just over a guitar. The band comes in about 30 seconds in. Even though, because of its title, Show of Hands, you might think it's related to recent songs like 2019's Cold, Cold Hands or 2017's When We All Hold Hands at the End of the World. But lyrically, with its metaphor of walls acting as a vehicle for self-confinement, the song calls back to 2004's Window of My World. In that song, Bob wrote, "A wall once blocked my view, and I couldn't move it, got bruises to prove it." That was pretty personal. Pollard was talking about his world. Here, the message is more universal. He writes, "Walls defeat us." The same as with the blocked view from Window of My World. Here he says they prevent us from stopping and finding it out. Basically, when you're blocked, when there's something in front of you that you just can't get around, you can't discover your own world or the wider world outside yourself. And Pollard thinks that people settle too easily. He writes here, "Reverse the exit sign, go back in." Basically, don't leave a place until you understand it, and break down any walls that might get in your way. The song's also musically mature, featuring synth strings and another acoustic guitar interlude. And at nearly 3 minutes, it's one of the few tracks on the album to stretch out instrumentally, which I always find welcome. I like the track a lot. Second to last song on the first side is Lip Curlers.
How does she even know how? How does she wear it so good? Cynical cheek and brow, finger like it should.
This entertaining track, with its mention of impudent ninth graders, calls back to the entitled brats of Poppy Field's Cul-de-sac Kids. In fact, the lip curlers of the song's title aren't some sort of instrument used to curl lips, but rather are precocious kids of cynical cheek and brow amped up on soda, basically 14 going on 40. And whereas I wondered with cul-de-sac kids whether Bob was recalling his own past or commenting on the kids of today, with this one I think I may have my answer, because Pollard also mentions spin class. When Bob was in the 9th grade, the same as me, spin class didn't exist. If we wanted to ride a bike, we had to actually go somewhere. It all adds up to a very untypical GBV tune, but also a very welcome one. It's a lot of fun. And speaking of kids, the last song on side 1 is Math Rock.
No resemblance to watch. If you could help me 2 or 3, I've got 1 and 4.
The album's first side goes out on an absolute high note with this awesomely bonkers song that's a lot of fun. The title refers to a genre of music, also sometimes called post-rock, which has its roots in some of Bob's beloved prog bands. In my bonus episode looking at the 4 Ps, I talked about how King Crimson's 1974 album Red set the template for a lot of the angular guitar-based music that started to be made in the late 80s and early 90s, and which continues to flourish today. It began with groups like Slint and Shellac, and continues thanks to ensembles like American Football and Battles. Math rock usually contains sinewy guitar lines, long instrumental passages, and a rejection of any standard rock beat. GBV's version of the genre starts with a guitar which sounds vaguely like math rock. It's soon joined by some plunking on a child's toy piano. This is a sly repudiation of the idea that only serious musicians can play this kind of music. This is soon joined by a staccato Kevin March drum beat of fills and syncopated cymbals. It's actually a cool bit of music, and it seems like it's destined for Joan of Arc territory when the groove and crunching guitars kick in and we're back in GBV land. In the opening lyrics, Pollard asks for help with 2 or 3, saying he already knows 1 and 4. This might be a commentary on the odd time signatures that are a hallmark of the genre. And this may not be something that Bob's longtime lead guitarist, Doug Gillard, is a fan of, since Bob then follows a brief repeated chorus of the song's title with the line, "Designed to drive Doug crazy." After a brief second verse, Pollard is joined by a children's choir repeating the song's title. Now, I must say I'm a huge fan of using children's choirs on songs, whether it's Wizard's I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day or the recent Sparks track, Please Don't Fuck Up My World. So I think this is a totally enjoyable and perfectly executed touch. Another fun detail here is that the choir is from Montclair, New Jersey's School of Rock, where drummer Kevin March serves as the general manager. In fact, March's daughter Kate is part of the choir. The kids ranged from 10 to 14 years old, and as March told a local website, as soon as the students got into the studio and their microphones went on, they were ready to rock. They were focused, had no fear, and knocked out their parts in less than 2 hours. They sound great in the mix, and Robert loved their performance. The choir was recorded at Magic Door Studios in Montclair, which is where March often records his drum parts for GBV LPs. Producer Travis Harrison's 2 daughters, Luna and Ruby, also get into the action. Each of them repeats the line, "Designed to drive Doug crazy," at different points in the track, except their voices are played backward. Their contribution is appropriately credited in the liner notes by their names being printed backwards. It all adds up to an absolutely killer track, one of my favorites on the record, and a stupendous example of how 30 albums into their career, this group continues to grow and serve up crazy shit for our listening pleasure. Side 2 kicks off with Transfusion. This is the album's longest track at just a few seconds shy of 3.5 minutes. It's a slow song that, for me anyway, was a real grower. When I first heard it, it didn't do much for me, but there's actually a lot to like. For example, the psychedelic touches in the bridge are effective and the surreal lyrics are vintage Pollard. There's also a funny moment when he writes, "The mime is dead," or "just pretending." So it's a strong start to side 2. Next up is Biker's Nest.
Biker's Nest. Crazy. Down in the cellar.
After an off-kilter 20-second instrumental opening that sounds a lot like Circus Devils, the track kicks into heavy metal Kid territory. The rock sounds meant to mimic the environment, I suppose, of the biker's nest of the title, since I would guess that most bikers are into loud rock more than, say, folk or ambient electronica. Speaking of, I would guess the track's title is meant to be a bit of a pun on Viper's Nest. This album, in fact, has tons of puns and wordplay. In Lip Curlers, Bob writes about a popular but rebellious girl being a diffa-cool daughter, and a few lines later he pens the clever "wherever ego, she go now." At under 2 minutes, Biker's Nest is one of the shorter tracks on the album, but it's a lot of fun and I bet will be a killer song to hear live. Moving on, we have A Whale is Top Notch.
If you find your phone, would you leave it alone? And the whale is top-notch.
This is the shortest song at just over a minute. It's the latest on a long line of whale-related tracks by Bob. Others include White Whale, Harvest Whale, and a personal favorite, Ambergris from Same Place the Fly Got Smashed. That being said, whereas Yes's song Don't Kill the Whale was a tribute to that largest of the seas creature, here Pollard's just being mostly surreal. Musically, the track's a blast with great guitar and a superb performance by Kevin March. In the past, I've been critical of GBV's short songs, but this one feels complete and lands perfectly. Next up is I Touch Down.
I touch down. I move in.
For a band whose songwriter used to be a quarterback, but who also constantly alludes to flight and planes, a title like I Touch Down could have multiple meanings. Lines like, found it too hard, found a new yard to touch down, don't quite answer the question. Is this a sequel to See My Field or to Huffman Prairie Flying Field? I can't quite tell. It's one of the slower songs on the record, but Pollard's voice, as he hits a number of high notes, sounds great and is well placed in the mix. Next up is Haircut Sphinx.
Haircut Sphinx. Drinks and drinks.
In terms of what this song is about, Consequence of Sounds Ran Grave writes that the lyrics can be read two ways, as a surreal discourse on hair, reality, and the things we do to stay entertained, or as a character sketch of a seemingly emotionless woman in a wig shop. I'll stay out of the debate since I can't figure it out one way or the other. Musically, the song just sort of stomps without ever getting started. Also, a whole lot of the lyrics are spoken rather than sung, and when Pollard repeats the word drinks 7 times, it feels a bit like parody, so it's not one of my favorites. Moving on, it's Screaming the Night Away.
Ask a choice, hear a voice screaming the night away. Do your best, hear your...
The title here seems to be a parody of the 1962 Sam Cooke song, Twistin' the Night Away. That song was a hit for Cooke on both the American pop and R&B charts, in addition to reaching number 6 on the British single charts. The song later became the name of Cooke's 10th studio record, released that same year. And the lyrics, Bob's giving you a choice. You can take a risk and do everything you can to be your best self, or you can place a bet and just wish your life away. And as a final choice, you can just give up and live your life adrift. In fact, the final line, or you can be lost and always gone, is a callback to the track Always Gone from the prior record, Surrender Your Poppy Field. Musically, it's a bit too mid-tempo to make it memorable, which a few of the songs on side 2 fall into. That being said, the last 30 seconds of the song are strong, with the band stretching out a bit instrumentally and Pollard hitting some high notes. The record starts to wind down by saying, "Thank you, Jane."
Hey, way to go and thank you, Jane, for making it all work out. Hey, way to go and thank you, Jane.
At 3 minutes and 7 seconds, this is the second longest song on the record, and only one of 2 which stretch past the 3-minute mark. The name Jane's been used in 3 previous Pollard songs: the track Cocaine Jane from the first Suitcase compilation, It Floors the Jane from the Circus Devils LP My Mind Has Seen the White Trick, and most famously, the crowd favorite Jane of the Waking Universe from 1997's Mag Earwig. In terms of this latest one, press materials for Mirrored Aztec call Thank You Jane perhaps the most open-hearted, guileless power pop song from Pollard's pen in ages. I totally agree. It's a strong song and easily my favorite one on the second side. Its longer running time means the tune has a lot of space for twists and turns, and there are a number of effective guitar and vocal touches. It's also quite a sweet song, Bob taking the time to basically repeatedly thank someone for both helping him and tied to the sentiment in the last track for being their best self. Second to last song on the album is The Best Foot Forwards.
I'm stuck, quick, reman your baseline foot is slanted. Some of the best foot forward.
This is kind of a weird song. It doesn't have much of a melody and there's not much of a structure to it. Bob's just kind of spitting out the words and the words don't make much sense. For me, the band saves the day. Kevin March is going crazy in the drums and Mark Shue is playing a high bass line that adds a lot. But as I said before, I think the album has maybe 2 or 3 more songs than it needs, and this is definitely one of them. Now we're at the final song on the LP, The Party Rages On.
Bilge face down, priest was called on, and the party rages on.
Let me start out by saying that this is not, as I had hoped, a cover of the Zumpano track by the same name. If you don't know them, Zumpano were a short-lived power pop band from the 90s, and The Party Rages On was the first track on their debut album, 1995's Look What the Rookie Did. If the band is remembered at all, it's for having new pornographer Carl Newman as a member, and if you like 90s indie pop, you should check them out. In terms of the GBV track, it's a fun closer even though for most of its 2.5 minutes, it's a kind of a start-stop chug which doesn't give the listener much to grab onto. But the fact that it has a long fade-out, is Doug's shredding on the guitar, makes it feel like the same as the party the track describes, the album just keeps going on. And whereas Zumpano opened their album with the track, thereby declaring that the party was just getting started, GBV here uses it to imply that it's just going to go on and on and on. And so because of that, it's a really effective closer. The lyrics seem to reference an old friend of the band, Bella Co. Krumpicher, who had a Columbus-based label in the early 90s called Anyway Records. Anyway released 2 split singles by the band in 93 and 94. They also played at Bella's 26th birthday party in Columbus in 1994, a celebration which was captured on tape and later released as the semi-official bootleg, Crying Your Knife Away. If you've ever heard it, you can tell it's a booze-soaked set, something Bob seems to reference here with the first line, Bella was face down. In fact, he's so drunk they've called a priest. But even that and some blown speakers won't stop the party from, as Bob says, raging on. He makes a pun later in the track, writing, and Lombardi rages on. He's name-checking Matador label founder Chris Lombardi, who founded the company in New York in 1989. The following year, Gerard Koslow joined. GBV would sign to the label and release their first record on Matador in 1995. Given that the group just hit its 25th anniversary of Alien Lanes being released, this is a fun touch. As the song fades out, Pollard repeats one word over and over, touchdown. This is a callback to the 4th song on this side, I Touch Down. And seeing as how that song has a bit of a sporting connotation, Bob's repetition of the word here feels like a sort of musical victory dance in the end zone. Because here they are, it's their 30th record. The band's existed for 4 decades. Pollard's traveled the world and has a legion of adoring fans. The group that began as a fantasy and then was a t-shirt is still going strong. In fact, they're better than ever. And shit, yeah, that's cool. Okay, that's it for the show. Go to everygbvlp.com to listen to past episodes of this podcast. Go to rockathonrecords.com to buy Mirrored Aztec on vinyl or CD. And be sure to check out my new book about the band, Zeppelin over Dayton, Guided by Voices album by album, wherever books are sold. Thanks for listening. I'll be back later in the year when GBV releases their 3rd LP of 2020, Styles We Paid For. Until then, stay home, stay safe, and God bless the Monument Club.
This on the sex